So this video is going to look at evaluation and how we can move from basic evaluation into more effective evaluation and really in-depth evaluation of research and explanations to help you hit those top banded marks, those band 4 marks in your 16-mark questions. So if in the exam you get stuck and you can't remember the specific evaluation points for research studies or theories, then there are some generic evaluation points that you could fall back onto if you get really stuck. Okay, so for studies, research studies, I'd like you to think of the acronym of GRAVE. So can we generalize the findings? Are we able to apply the findings from the study to other situations, other people across different time periods, or do we need to be cautious when generalizing? Now, please don't say this doesn't mean we can't generalize, because obviously you can, but the idea is that if a sample isn't representative, then we should be cautious when generalizing, when applying those findings to the whole population. Is the research reliable? Can we replicate it in future studies? Equally, has the results and findings been replicated over a period of time? Does the results seem to be consistent? Are there any real-world applications of the findings? So is there any benefits for society from this research? Has it helped with medicines, with treatments, with policies, with policing techniques? Then if you really want to, you could extend that a bit further and then say how that is important for the economy. Remember, AQA want you to have psychology and the economy as a topic, so you can talk about how that applications have improved the economy. V, is it valid? Is it internally valid? So does the research actually intend what it intends to study? Is it externally valid? i.e., can we apply it to other people? Ecological population validity, outside of the research setting, ecological validity. Is it temporally valid? So can we apply it over time? Does it have face validity? Does it look like it's measuring what it's meant to? Is there concurrent validity, etc.? And then finally, ethics. Was the study ethical or not? Has the researcher breached any of the ethical guidelines? Did they need to breach the guidelines, though, in order for the research to be done? So if you think about Milgram's research and Ash's research, deception was needed in order to make sure the participants behaved correctly and there was no demand characteristics. So the cost-benefit of deception was outweighed by the benefits of getting accurate research. Equally, we need to be mindful that psychologists have a duty of care to the participants, and if they are breaching that, then they have broken that duty of care. Now, for explanations and theories, if you think of the acronym of SCOUT, so is there any supporting evidence? Is there any contradictory evidence? So these are your more specific evaluation points that you would have been taught. Now, the next ones are a bit more that you could use if you got stuck in the exam. So are there any other explanations? Now, when we study psychology, we always look at most ideas from a different viewpoint. So you've had to learn different explanations, so you might as well make comparisons in the evaluation. So for example, if we are evaluating biological explanations of schizophrenia, then we could talk about how it is reductionist, i.e. it's reducing it down to a single neurotransmitter such as dopamine, and therefore is not offering a whole explanation and might not be the sole factor because it is ignoring environmental factors, family factors such as the double bind theory. It's ignoring expressed emotion. So we can talk about how it might be that we need to have an interactionist approach. So you've had to learn these other explanations. It is worthwhile trying to reduce the amount of evaluation that you have to know and use these when you are evaluating. Is it useful? So similar to real world applications, has it led to any benefits? So for example, if we're evaluating explanations of phobias and we're talking about how behavioural approach says that you learn your phobias through classical conditioning and then maintain through operant conditioning, then we can talk about how it's useful in that it's led to the development of successful treatments which are based on the assumptions of behavioural. So it's led to the treatments of systematic desensitisation and flooding. So if those treatments are valid and successful, then obviously the assumptions that they are based on must equally be valid. T, is it testable? Can we actually test the theory or explanation? So, for example, Freud's theory is unfalsifiable. There are issues with testing it. We can't actually test the unconscious and the defense mechanisms. Therefore, there's issues around testability. Equally, if a lot of support for the explanation has come from lab experiments, what are the benefits or negatives of doing so? So what research methods have been used in the supporting evidence, and are there any problems of doing so? So when we are coming to evaluate, if you can try to remember to peel your evaluation points, okay, to really show the examiner you know your stuff, make it really clear that you are explaining. So make it clear that you are now starting your evaluation point. So you should have, in a 16 marker, approximately 2 AO1 paragraphs about your theory or your research study. Then make it really clear that you're moving on to evaluation. Have it as a separate paragraph and start with a strength of, a weakness of, an advantage of, a limitation of, a benefit of, a problem with, an issue with. Examiners are busy people. You want to make it really clear that you are hitting that evaluation point. Evidence, you're now providing some evidence to support that lead phrase, that point sentence. So you're backing it up with some evidence, some knowledge that you know to support your ideas. Explaining and expanding on why it is a strength and weakness. Imagine the examiner is really stupid and doesn't understand why maybe a lab experiment might be a good thing, and equally why a lab experiment might have some negatives around it. Why demand characteristics are a bad thing. So really make it clear to them that you know what that means for research or for the explanation. So you're demonstrating that you just haven't learnt some facts about a lab experiment being beneficial because it has high internal validity. You're showing the examiner you actually understand what that means. Then finally, link it back to the question, keep it focused on the question, link it back to that explanation, that research study, and say either what that does to the assumptions of the theory or what it does for the findings and conclusions. Some example ones then. Point, a strength of Milgram's research is that it's internally valid. This is because it was a lab experiment, meaning there was high control over extraneous variables that could have confounded the results. So I've said it's internally valid, that's my point, saying that it's a strength, that's a good thing. I've then provided some evidence about why it's internally valid. Now I'm going to say why that high level of control is a good thing. As a result, we can establish cause and effect, that participants continued to the 450 volts due to obeying an authority figure. So I've said the benefits of why there are controls and why extraneous variables might be reduced. What is the benefit of that? What does that mean in terms of the results and findings? Therefore, this increases the internal validity of the results, which strengthens the conclusions of the study. So I've sort of summarised about why that's a good thing, and I've linked it back to the question or to the point sentence. Another example is limitations of Ash's research is the sample is biased. For example, the research was only carried out on American males. So I've made my point that the sample is not representative. I've then provided the evidence about why it's not representative. This means the findings are not representative of the wider population and other cultures. Research has found on average conformity rates for an individualistic culture was about 25%, whereas collectivist cultures was much higher at 37%. So I've explained about what that means in terms of applying to the wider population. This weakens the findings and conclusions of research because it lacks population validity and therefore may not be applicable to everyone. So I've linked it back. Now, what I would suggest if you are using your point evidence explain link is, if you are struggling to do the link, then it's perfectly fine to do point evidence explain. Do the 3-part rule and that is fine. So it's better to do those well than to try and rush doing peel paragraphs. Now equally, if you feel like you can do your peel sentences and you want to develop it even further, you can include counterpoints or counter-evaluation within the same evaluation point. So rather than writing them as two separate paragraphs, you sort of merge them together. So we're going to turn that strength about Milgram's research and have a counterpoint. So the strength of Milgram's research is internally valid. This is because it was a lab experiment, meaning there's control over extraneous variables. As a result, we can establish cause and effect, therefore increases the internal validity of results and strengthens the conclusions. Now, we can convert that by having a counterpoint after that explain. So our point stays the same, evidence stays the same, our explain stays the same, but now we're going to impose or put in a counterpoint that maybe the research wasn't as internally valid. So nevertheless, some psychologists have argued that the study might not be as valid as first thought. They claim participants knew that they were through the setup of the experiment and the shocks weren't real because the researcher did not respond to the stress of the learner. Okay, so I've started as a strength. So strength of Milgram's research is internally valid. This is because it was a lab experiment, meaning that there was high control over extraneous variables. As a result, we can establish cause and effect. Nevertheless, some psychologists have argued that the study might not be as valid as first thought. They claim the participants knew that the experiments and the shocks weren't real because the researcher or experimenter didn't respond to the distress of the learner. Therefore, whilst the findings offer some important scientific evidence about obedience, caution should be taken when drawing conclusion about individuals carrying out immoral acts due to blind obedience. So I've started as a strength. I've included a counterpoint, and then in that link I've sort of said, yes, this is a strength, but nevertheless we should be cautious about those findings because of that counter argument. Equally, you could develop it even further by including issues and debates. So once you've studied this topic within psychology, you should be able to drop in some issues and debates throughout your evaluation points from previous knowledge and learning to show the examiner that you are synoptic. Now, I don't want you to shoehorn it in just because you think it's going to get you marks, because it's not. It needs to be embedded well. Okay. Grenades is an acronym to help you remember the different issues and debates. So gender bias. Is there any issue with the genders that have been studied? Has it only been done on men? Has it only been done on women? So alpha bias will exaggerate the differences between males and females. So if research is only done on men, and therefore, say for example, research into testosterone and aggression predominantly done on males, and therefore we say that aggression leads to high levels of testosterone leads to aggression, males are more aggressive, we're exaggerating those differences between men and women. Now, beta bias is where you minimize the differences or ignore any differences. So research is only done on men, but the findings are applied to women. Culture bias is where we only look at it in a certain culture, so it could be ethnocentric, and it could have imposed ethic where we are judging other cultures based on our own norms and values. So imposed ethic would be, for example, Ainsworth's types of attachment. She's judged what a secure attachment is on Bowlby's theory, so a British theory, and American values as well. Reductionism, so is there any biological reductionism, environmental reductionism, psychic, and versus holism, so have we reduced the theory down? Are there any ethical issues? So we talked about that idea before, but is it socially sensitive of the research? So if we were to apply the findings to other people outside, would it be socially sensitive? And are there any ethical implications of the research? Now, nature and nurture. So this kind of links to the idea of does it only say that it's down to innate factors such as genes, inheritance, evolution, neurotransmitters? Does it say that there's environmental factors? If not, maybe an interactionist viewpoint might be more beneficial. So the approach, is it ideographic or nomothetic? So ideographic believes that people should be studied as individuals, and there's no attempt to compare them to a large group or create a general rule or norm or law. Nomothetic tries to produce general laws of behaviour, so it can try to predict outcomes. So if people are in this situation, they will behave like this. If people have high levels of dopamine, they will develop schizophrenia. Determinism or free will. So is it deterministic? So biological, environmental, psychic determinism, or is it hard and soft determinism, or does it recognise people have free will? Extrapolation of the research. Does it use animals in research? If so, is that valid? Is it not valid? Can we apply findings from animal research to humans? Are humans too different to animals, etc.? And then psychology as a science. Is it objective rather than being subjective? So is the research methods objective? Can we replicate the studies? Can it be checked? Will it be reliable? And can we falsify the research? Is it possible to disprove the findings and theories? If we were to take Ash's evaluation point, and let's have a look at how we would expand on that. So a limitation of Ash's research is the sample is biased. For example, the research was only carried out on American males. This means that findings are not representative of the wider population in other cultures. This weakens the findings and conclusions. So if we were to try and include some issues and debates, a limitation of Ash's research is the sample is biased and caution should be taken when generalising, so you could extend that a bit more. For example, the research was both androcentric and ethnocentric, as it was only carried out on American males. So I'm embedding some issue and debates keywords. This means the findings are not representative of the wider population and other cultures. Researchers found that average conformity rates for individualistic cultures was about 25%, whereas collectivist cultures was much higher. This means it would be beta bias to apply findings and conclusions to all cultures. So maybe an ideographic approach might be to explaining conformity might be more useful than trying to create general laws for all cultures. This weakens the findings and conclusions of research because it lacks population validity and therefore may not be applicable to everyone, and as it is culturally biased. So you're embedding those issues and debates.